Good afternoon, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to this week's exciting edition of Thegither, your breakdown of news and politics from Scotland and around the world. My name is Stephen, and I'm representing the national newspaper today, and joining me in the studio is our regular Angela Haggerty from Common Space.
Hello.
And we're also joined by Ewan from the Trussell Trust.
Hello.
Though he is at pains to say at the very beginning that this is about his views and does not necessarily represent the views of the Trussell Trust. Just to get that out of the way and to avoid all impending lawsuits. So thank you for tuning in. Comments throughout the show, please do leave them down below. As always, we want to hear what you're saying. We will be watching them throughout the course of the programme. And if you want to give us a wee share to help us reach a few other people, please do as well. And I'm going to kick it off with actually our audience question, because we want to hear your opinions on this. It's something that's kind of been in the news specifically, well, quite a lot recently, I guess, after the Orange March in Glasgow, which Common Space has done a bit of work on as well, and I was looking to do whether or not some of the singing had been sectarian in nature, and the police looking into that, and it's led to this question of, like, is Glasgow potentially going to ban orange marches in the future? So we want to hear your thoughts on, should orange marches be banned, or are they okay to go ahead as they are? And I reckon we'll probably come back to that in a little bit as well, once we've heard some of your opinions.
I'm a bit disappointed that the audience question isn't, do you like Angela's new haircut?
I like Angela's new haircut.
Thank you.
I think the audience question could have been, did anyone notice
Angela's
Angela's
about
new haircut?
that as well, if you would like.
Yeah, exactly. If you want to comment on any of her hair or facial, come on to that now. So we're going to chat about the economy to begin with. Of course, the kind of looking specifically at Scotland, which saw a growth of 0.8% in the first quarter compared to the last, specifically down to basically the manufacturing industry, kind of a bit of a comeback. Nice. For a lot of people, what the more interesting side of this is, or personally for me, what I think is more interesting, is the fact that the Conservatives were so intent on spinning this on the run-up to the actual figures released. They kept putting out press releases and going on to things saying, like, you know what, these economic figures, they're on the shoulders of the SNP ahead of them being released, because everyone, or rather they were expecting it to be a recession. They went to great lengths over and over again saying this is all down to the SNP, and then when the figures came out and it turned out that actually Scotland had grown 4 times faster than the rest of the UK, meant that something had this weird U-turn, and today David Mundell, the Secretary of State for Scotland, came out saying that actually it was because the Conservatives had been working with the Scottish Government, and that's how they managed to get this kind of, as they put it, delivering for Scotland. I mean, did you think there's something a little bit cynical about that, Angela?
No, never.
No?
Well, see, to start off with, I'd just like to say, is there nothing like the term GDP figures to make you want to go back to bed? I mean, it's just horrendous. I mean, economic stories, as important as they are, see when they come out, it's like pulling teeth really trying to talk about them. But maybe not this time, because it was a surprise, wasn't it? Scotland actually did better than everybody thought. And like you say, the Tories were preparing, and they really were preparing. They were putting out press releases in the day or two before the figures came out. You know, they were sure that Scotland was going to be going back in recession, etc., etc. And there we have David Mundell trying now to take the credit for the fact that that hasn't happened. But hey, that's politics.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Ian?
Well, I think it was welcome news. I mean, working in the area that I do, I'm seeing people regularly who are experiencing the absolute brunt of the economic situation that we're in.
Which actually, just very quickly, can you just
sorry.
Just for anyone who doesn't know what the Trussell Trust is.
Yeah, I mean, my job is to help establish food banks right across the country. I've just come from Oban, which is not one of the places you would expect there to be a food bank, but yes, there is. And only just a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, I should say, visiting Shetland, which is the crown jewel of the oil and gas industry. And yet they have a food bank there. If ever there was an indication that prosperity and austerity live on the same street, it's that. So I think when you hear about any economic growth, it's a positive thing. We're in a period where everything has almost stagnated because of the impending threat of Brexit. We've already seen Unilever inflate their prices by 5.7%, which is going to have a destructive impact on the people that we work directly with. So I was delighted to hear that there's a bit of economic growth. The fact is, we still have to keep in the picture the fact that there is a 1.7 trillion deficit debt and a deficit that's only been halved. We need that eliminated. And yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm quite fond of David Mundell. I was the guy that invited him to open a food bank in his constituency, and he was accompanied by 150 protesters and placards. But I have to say that he's a good constituency MP, and I think he's got a genuine heart. But yeah, we have to see economic growth that transcends both sides of the border.
Mm-hmm. Surely the issue as well isn't just necessarily economic growth, but where that money is going, or rather where it's ending up, because we're also seeing not only maybe even if there is economic growth, at the same time the disparity between the richest and poorest is growing as well. So with economic growth, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to benefit everyone. Well,
the trickle-down impact is that sometimes the wealthy, their cups just get bigger, and so the trickle-down doesn't trickle down at all. And I think that's what we've seen in the last few years. There's been this gross inequality as those who are more wealthy, their economic fortitude has grown, whereas those who are at the bottom of the pile, the only thing that's growing down here is the number of people that are coming to our food banks in Scotland every year. I mean, 145,000 people in Scotland alone last year. That's the size of Murrayfield Stadium, sold out twice over. I mean, we need to change that.
Mm.
I think that there's another risk in terms of the economic growth, and a lot of people were celebrating, particularly on the indie side, that this was better news, and the SNP were certainly feeling, I think, quite kind of gloaty about it. But it strikes me a little bit like, for the indie movement, is this just kind of limited thinking? Do you think that a little bit of tweaking with some figures, a little bit of growth or whatever is what you're looking for? Or do you want to get back to talking more about what the indie movement was talking about, which was much more radical rethinking of economy and how you distribute monies throughout society? And that clash just is constantly ongoing, I think, between the more radical element of imagining a whole new country and society, with the more managerial element of the SNP that wants to demonstrate that it can do well in government. And those two things just keep sort of clashing at the moment, I think. It's interesting to see people's different takes on it.
Yeah, and I think possibly some of the celebrating of this turnaround of the economy, even if it isn't necessarily the best, but still better than what we've seen, is often, I think, viewed through the lens of those who conflate the independence movement and the SNP is essentially the same thing. Therefore, anything that seems to back up the SNP or the Scottish Government is in itself another feather on the cap for later on arguing the case for independence. But I think you're right, focusing again too much on the economy rather than where that money ultimately ends up or how many people are visiting food banks. That was ultimately, I guess, one of the more core messages of the independence movement at one point, and probably where we should be asking more questions around where that wealth is going rather than just ensuring that it is being generated.
I think you're right. I mean, that's a very salient point, Stephen. I mean, the amount of interviews I had in the run-up to the referendum, about having the conversation about food banks was a very pertinent question. And I think that's probably one of the things that the independence movement, and again I'm speaking apolitically here, tapped into was the social justice argument. I think what when I'm out speaking to people, a lot of people are concerned that essentially the independence movement has now wedded itself to the issue of Brexit, which actually doesn't resonate with people who are experiencing poverty quite as much. A, because a lot of people don't understand it, and furthermore because we've not experienced it yet, really. But I think the independence movement in 2014 had tapped into that social justice argument. I think it was the point at which the penny dropped when people thought, actually, we could have a social security system devolved entirely to Scotland. And I think one of the things that Jean Freeman has been very good at seizing is the opportunity to have 2,000 voices of people experiencing poverty feeding into what that social security system might look like. Who are the experts on poverty? The people who are experiencing poverty. And so I think we have to find ways in which we can amplify those voices to find a social security system that actually works for people and supports them out of the crisis that they're in. Sorry about that massive segue there. But
No, it's a great point.
No, you're right. Actually, it reminds me, I saw an interesting tweet from an MP at the moment. I can't remember who it was now, which is really going to frustrate me, but it was something about how, I've been out speaking to the working class, my working class constituents about the issues that really matter to them. Nationalism, Brexit, something else completely that is not a working class issue. And you went, I don't think you've been talking to anybody, mate. I think you just pulled that one out of Well, you know where. Because it's true, like, and we've had this conversation a few times on here, is that sometimes we feel like we've actually gotten a little bit too stuck into issues that aren't necessarily the ones that most people are concerned around. Like, we do talk about Brexit a lot, but at the same time, for a lot of folk, that's just something happening in the background just now. And in some ways might not even be happening, according to some at the moment. There's sort of renewed discussion around whether or not Brexit is even going to happen as things just continue to be a mess.
Isn't that really hilarious? We go through all this and then we just go, forget it.
Oh, I mean, it'd be so indicative though of like sort of politics at the moment. We should just so much time and effort into things that we just sort of chuck away at the end. And it'd be such a waste. Can you imagine if you look back?
Do you think there's actually a possibility of that Brexit might just get chucked out the window?
I think there's a possibility of anything. I cease to be surprised at things that are happening.
Fair enough.
But can you imagine if you look at everything that's going on with like a general election because of Brexit being called because of the rise of like UKIP, and then if at the very end of it, all we've got is Brexit isn't happening and we've got a hung parliament, and everyone's going to look back at 2 years of politics and be like, what the did we actually get done in that period of time other than just flap about and not really achieve much at all?
That's the sad thing, because these issues, you know, and to a large extent in Scotland as well, with the constitutional question, there's such a distraction for politicians and for media, for that matter, that, you know, all of that, you know, the kind of work that you're doing, the stuff that people are actually suffering right now, it feels like there's going to be very little progress or movement on anything that really, really massively affects other people's lives.
Angela, you've just nailed it. I mean, a couple of weeks ago we were having a debate in the Scottish Parliament about food banks. It was the first one for 3 years. And as I'm making my way out of the building, you know, I saw Neil Findlay, the Scottish Labour MSP in the train station, and he says, Ewan, he says, we've had over 20 debates on Brexit in the last 6 months. He says, we've had one debate in the last 6 months. In fact, the last 3 years on food banks. He says, we should be having 20 debates on this very issue. And I think he absolutely nailed it right there, is that, you know, the fact that people are experiencing economic crisis in this time when we're talking about figures going up and economic growth, it's what a travesty.
But that's what it all comes back to again, this point that I was making at the beginning as well about this political posturing around constitutional issues or economic questions. It's more about having the right message. So the Tories saying this is on the SNP shoulders, and then immediately after that having to switch tactic when things were actually a little bit better than they thought it was going to be, to actually know we were involved as well. It's more vapid, it feels. It's just sort of this, I mean, I'll have people, and it frustrates me every time when someone's like, well, that's politics. It's like, well, maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe we could aim for something a little bit better.
Just to inject a wee bit of positivity into there, I think one of the great things about you know, both actually referendums, I mean, you know, there was a lot of bad stuff as well, I'm sure we'd all agree, but you know, to have 85% turnout in the Scottish independence referendum and 72% turnout in the EU referendum, I think there is this appetite that is growing. You know, we've assumed for years, because there's only 30% turnout at the European elections and, you know, 50-60% in certain constituencies for the general election, to actually see there be such voter engagement and such engagement on social media as well, which was so powerful. Some of it was quite nasty, but for the vast majority of it, I think it was quite positive, and people were actually becoming awake to how politics actually impacts their life. I think that was one of the energising things. I remember Jim Murphy talking about a time when he was out, you know, and there was a bunch of girls that were out on a hen night, and they're sitting talking about fiscal autonomy. I mean, I'm brilliant, you know what I mean? It's just the way that people were getting engaged in issues that just were completely, you know, an anomaly to them in the past, and I think we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the things I always remember from the first referendum, was it felt like this like primer in politics. Because before that, and it's one of the reasons I started making videos and ultimately I guess got to here, was basically up until that point it kind of felt like politics was this movie that you switched on halfway through, where all these players, you know, they might say one thing but actually had ulterior motives, but you didn't know that because you hadn't seen the 5 scenes before that. The independence referendum was like this great primer for everyone to kind of go, okay, these people represent this, these people say this, but actually they kind of mean this. These people over here say they're objective, but actually they're kind of reporting from this kind of angle. And by the end of it, everyone was like, oh yeah, I kind of get where all the pieces are, I get what's going on. And you can kind of go into debates after that on a much stronger footing and be engaged, not feel like you're outside of that discussion, which a lot of people were, and some still are. You know, there's still that feeling of separation away from politics.
I think it's interesting that you had such a response to the referendums, in terms of voter engagement, and that those votes to me were, people en masse realising that here was an opportunity to make one vote really count for something, where they feel like they've lost faith in the rest of the electoral system when it comes to general elections, local council elections, the turnouts haven't been as good. I think that was a demonstration that people don't feel like there's a lot of faith in the system, the political system that we have, so much so that they don't bother going out to vote. But when they do think that their vote counts, that it matters for something, that it can actually create some sort of a change, they're far more motivated. And they're not only motivated to go out and vote, but like you say, they want to actually get involved in the issues. They want to take part in it.
And actually, I think it was that very motive that was seized upon during the EU referendum. I think for a lot of people, we've even seen it internationally with Trump and the rise of Le Pen in France, is that there has been this people sort of pushing the political reset button. Let's just wipe the slate clean and start again. Which in some senses can be good, but in some senses can be absolutely destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's actually move on to another story from this week, and it's going to bring back to the... Actually, no, let's not come back to the honest question right now. Let's actually set it up with... so in my notes, I've written just Rangers, because I knew you were coming on, Angela, and I knew I didn't need to take many notes, because I could just sort of hand it over to you. It's like, so Angela, what's happening with Rangers?
Just to let you know, viewers, that this programme is going to be on until next week, because that's how long it's going to take to get through this story. But right, basically, we had the big tax case final verdict yesterday, and this has been a long-running tax dispute between Rangers and HMRC. It's been going on for about 7 years, and it covers a period of time where Rangers used a thing called the Employee Benefit Trust scheme, which was a way of paying players without paying the usual tax. So basically, what Rangers said was that they were giving loans to players rather than paying them wages. This allowed them to pay massive wages to people that otherwise they would have had to pay due taxes on, which gave them, therefore, a sporting advantage. So, the tax case verdict basically means that HMRC has been chasing this and chasing it, because as you all know, Rangers went out of business. So it cannot pay, the Rangers that we have now is different, it's a different entity. So it is not liable for any of these taxes. And the old Rangers, the Rangers in liquidation, has nothing of any real substance and value. So why is HMRC doing this? Because Rangers wasn't the only club or company using the EBT scheme. Actually, it's been used right across the UK. It's been used by other football clubs, by other sporting institutions. It's been used by businesses. It's been used by figures, by people, individuals that you might have heard of as well. Kind of high-profile figures. So this is HMRC basically getting the legal precedent to then go to everyone else and say, right, the courts have made the judgment, you owe us taxes and you owe us a lot of money. So it's a really important judgment for HMRC. In Scotland, it brings up a whole other issue in terms of the football aspect of, well, Rangers won 14 titles in that period of time when they had an unfair advantage that other clubs didn't have. So therefore, should those titles be stripped? So that's the big question now. Obviously, Rangers fans won't want that, but the rest of the fans in Scottish football are furious. They're really angry, because if you think that, people have paid in good faith into a game, a lot of money, big football fans, it's a family thing. They put a lot into their clubs, and they feel like they've done it all that time without knowing that it was being laced with this sort of cheating scheme. So there's a lot of anger there, and I think Rangers fans, actually, I feel sorry for all the decent Rangers fans out there that celebrated all those title wins, and because they're some of the best days you'll ever have as a football fan, and they're now looking back on those memories feeling like they were tainted. And I think that what football fans need to do is try and set that rivalry aside and say, do you know what, the people that screwed us all over are the money men. Again, it's all about people, richer people, making as much as they can without paying back into society. And then you're looking all around you, you're looking at all this poverty that we have, and then you're looking at this and thinking, this is just not right. It is not right. So if you can take the rivalry element, that kind of smaller stuff out of it and see the bigger picture, the Rangers story is actually about something much wider than it was ever about football. I think it probably got an unfair hearing when it was all going on, because it was sports desks that were trying to deal with a tax avoidance story. It didn't really work. they thought it was a football story and it never was. So I think
Actually, just come in really quickly here.
Sure.
We've got Don Corbett who's asking, or rather saying, that Falkirk would have won the Scottish Cup in 2009. Is there any truth to that?
Well, see, the thing is, though, you can't really go back and say, you can't be sure who would have won the titles or who would have won the cups, because you would have to null and void any game that Rangers fielded an EBT player in, and then you don't know how that would have affected other results, etc., etc. So you get into kind of dodgy territory with the idea of reallocating titles. A lot of fans think that you should just leave them blank. You should just say that those titles no longer count for Rangers, but they don't count for anyone. But that's a massive stain on Scottish football. That's absolutely huge when you think like that level of, which is essentially cheating. You know, that's what I would call that. When that was going on in the game for that number of years. And of course, the big tax case wasn't the only one. There was the wee tax case before that. And David Murray admitted liability. Before we even had the verdict yesterday, you know, we already knew that Rangers were guilty of tax avoidance, of not paying their way on that. So, yeah, there's big issues to be answered. You know, there should probably be a political element here when you're talking about tax avoidance at that scale. I think that's a political story as much as it is anything else. And it just, you know, it's come out in the last couple of days, actually, that Zaid and Kerr at STV found this out, that Nicola Sturgeon herself actually invited David Murray to a business dinner at Bute House in March.
And that was a dinner with no notes or minutes of what was
it
actually
appears
discussed.
that nothing really was taken, no notes were taken other than to say that there was discussion about the labour market. Now, this was a business dinner, there were other people at this, it wasn't just David Murray, but big tax case aside, as I said, there was already the wee tax case. We already know there's big questions over what happened at Rangers. And David Murray, you know, by all accounts, a lot of people would look at his record and think, is that the kind of business that Scotland would want to be doing? Why is the First Minister entertaining this? So that brings a whole new element into the conversation. It's not just about the big tax case or about the football thing. It's now there's a bigger question about establishmentism, even if you want to call it that. David Murray very much represents, I think, kind of the old establishment of Scotland. So it's a fascinating story, absolutely fascinating. And, you know, if all of that wasn't enough, see the guy that came up with the EBT tax scheme. I'm not kidding. He's a porn star. He's an actual porn star. He directs porn movies as well as all his tax shenanigans. He does that on the side. I mean, it's bonkers. There's so many twists and turns in this story. That's before we even got on to Craig White. That's before we even got on to any, you know, there's just been a criminal trial there. I mean, it's difficult even for people to follow by this stage. It's become so complicated.
Yeah, porn movies and tax avoidance, that's an incredible portfolio.
I mean, there's going to be films made about this, or there should be, because it really is actually just a great story as well.
But the big thing to take away really is the fact that this isn't just necessarily about this one team. It's going to be kind of sliding movement from now on onto all these other things. It's other clubs, it's everything.
That will be the interesting thing to see now, how HMRC moves. The thing is, Rangers couldn't deal with the liability of tax that was going to fall on it, and that's part of the reason that it went into liquidation. And but there's clubs in England that can, you know, they can pay. They might take a big hit because they have to pay it, but they can pay it. So it'll be interesting to see.
Do you have any thoughts on the football? Do you follow football?
Well,
or rather, as we said, it's not necessarily a football story; it's a tax avoidance story.
Well, it is. I mean, fortunately, in my line of work, I get the opportunity to see the good side of football. So I get the opportunity to go along to the business luncheon where you know, Celtic decide to give £50,000 to launch Glasgow North East Food Bank, which is probably one of the best, most robust, well-supported food banks in Scotland. I get to go and hang out with Aberdeen Football Community Trust, you know, who've just been shortlisted alongside teams like you know, Ajax and Real Madrid for a European Football Community Award. And I'm also, as you know, although I'm in green, I'm a Hearts fan. You know, Hearts is a fan-owned club. It's the first club in Scotland to have implemented the living wage. It's the, you know, I mean, it's the first club to have ever had a sponsor that is a charity, Save the Children. So I get to see the good side as well. So I think football, it really is the beautiful game. I mean, we think about Paul Pogba and the amount that he gets in wages each week, which actually than Theresa May and the First Minister put together. Their annual wage, I might add. But there is another side to football, the non-Sam Allardyce side of football that is beautiful, and I think that's the part that I love to be involved in.
Yeah, and Hearts, I mean, that was good, because Hearts had just come out of administration not long before, and then they sort of came out of that with a whole different outlook on, I mean, the living wage stuff was just brilliant, and they beat Celtic to that as well. You know, Celtic fans are all about, you know, club like no other, the club of the poor, etc., etc. Celtic fans had to really lobby Celtic to get a living wage implemented, but Hearts were like way ahead.
And you're right. I mean, you know, there's the brother Walfred story, which is just beautiful. I mean, I love I'm kind of jealous of the Celtic heritage, I might add, but you know, Hearts has really sort of set its. You know, we have Big Hearts, which is the charitable wing as well. They've really come to the fore. And I think the way that clubs are across Scotland have started to collect food at football matches, I think is just, again, it shows, you know, these hard-working grafters that are at their, you know, doing their 9-to-5 job and just, you know, can't volunteer their time or unable to you know, pool their resource. And then you go to Celtic Park and it's absolutely rammed with all this food, you know, in my city of Dundee United and Dundee at their, you know, every one of their home matches they're collecting food and things like that. It's just, it's amazing to see, and I think that's the side of football I think that we need to shine a wee bit more light on. Hearts was a really, really bad story in the sense that we had you know, essentially a dictator, you know, a financial dictator coming in, taking over the club, and the mismanagement, the financial mishandling of resource was just astronomical. And to emerge out of that as a fan-owned club, you know, and props to Ian Murray, the local MP, who was at the forefront of that. He, you know, was the chair of the foundation of Hearts. You know, to see where Hearts has come from and where it is now, I think is a great place, and that's what football really needs to be about. You know, not this, you know, these, you know, all this money floating about. We've got to find a way in which we can actually shine the light on the good stuff that's happening as well. It's a beautiful game, and it should always be.
We only hear the bad stuff a lot of the time, and quite often it's the fans as well themselves that are getting given a hard time. And football fans are really terribly misrepresented as sort of thuggish, kind of loutish, and it's not like that's everything that you've just said. And football can be such a great community, like local community benefit. It's such a, you know, we do need to elevate that a wee bit more. But again, this is why the Rangers story, it's got all the wrong things going on in it, because it's that element of money driven kind of, we must win, we must be the best, we must have the best kind of attitude, that I don't think fans are really, you know, I don't think that represents really what most fans want. I think they just want clubs they can believe in and a good competition. And
that's obviously where a lot of that criticism of the OBFA comes from as well, is people feeling that fans have been misrepresented or criminalised before they've actually done anything whatsoever.
It's not to say that we don't have problems, of course we do, but
exactly.
You know, it's just not the whole story.
Which, after a really nice discussion about shining a light on the better side of football, I'm now going to move it back onto the darker side of football, because you know, it's like a trend in the show, like every time it's like it seems like we have to swing back.
You know, that's why you need me to inject some positivity into this whole thing. You know, a bit of optimism.
Like, we needed something just like bring some joy in every now and then. You have like a happy air horn. Whenever it gets too depressing, just like move the conversation on.
Thanks very much.
But yeah, of course. So this was the discussion we brought up at the very start of the show, and was wanting to hear your opinions on in our audience, which was, of course, the darker side, namely the Orange marches in Glasgow, and obviously there was a connection between them and Rangers, and specifically the singing of sectarian songs on the marches, which now is under investigation by the police, and a potential discussion of whether or not Glasgow is ultimately going to ban these marches moving forward. I mean, Angela, do you think there's any possibility that we're going to see Orange marches be banned in Glasgow at any point?
Well, it could be something like, rather than being banned outright, as in you cannot march, that it could be something else. Because as I understand it, you know, the City Council and the police, I think, meet the costs for a lot of public events like that, marches, rather than organisers, because it's your democratic right to be able to go out and do these things. So it could be more of a threat to remove resources from it or something, which may then put the order in a position where they can't hold things like that, because the big march, I mean, we know we have like a season of marches through the summer, but the big march in Glasgow is the one before the 12th of July in Belfast, and that's when you have a lot of people travel over to Glasgow and they all march to Glasgow and everything else. So it could be that it's more of a threat to ban that. But I got to say though, I mean, as horrible as it, and it really is horrible. I mean, you think that there were thousands of people marching through the streets of Glasgow, banging great big drums, and a number of them singing songs like the Famine Song, which is a racist song directed towards the Irish community in Glasgow, the immigrant Irish community, which of course Celtic represents because it was founded by them. It's telling them to go home, and you're just thinking, that you feel sort of shamed as a citizen of Glasgow, and this is a city that I love, that also can happen. That also is who we are. Apparently that is a bit of us. We have to accept that. It's there. We can't, we all sort of wander around pretending that it's not happening, and you're like, it's marching down the street with drums. It's there. We should be able to face it, but we still have great difficulty talking about it. But all of that said, I don't think that it would be a good idea to ban the marches, or to do anything that could force a ban, because the Orange Order in itself is not a banned organisation. I mean, I think if you just policed it properly, when people are breaking the law, then deal with those people that are breaking the law. There are other ways that you can put pressure on the order to try and police it itself, almost, to make it to discourage that kind of behaviour as much as possible. There should be a responsibility there. But I think if you ban it, what you risk doing is that more extreme element becomes more entrenched and starts to sort of feel that we are being oppressed. We are an oppressed culture feeling. And when you do that to people, when you start to push them into what feels like a corner, they'll suddenly find a fire in their belly that might not have been there before. So if you think it's bad now, it could get worse, basically, is what I'm saying, if you ban them. Whereas, if you just let them go on, and you might see, I mean, there was a good piece by Marianne Taylor of the Herald, actually, where she was talking about how she feels like she's noticed a change in the tone and the nature of them. She doesn't feel like it's as an aggressive, frightening, intimidating experience now as, say, it was 10 years ago. And we've had figures out recently that show that many, many more Scots are considering themselves to be atheists. They're further and further away from the roots and connections that would have held these things more strongly together. I think it's the same with Catholic schools. You might see a natural decline in these things. There's a natural decline in Catholic parishes because there's less people going into the priesthood, for example. So it may be if you kind of leave it alone, that society itself will just drift away from it more naturally. If you try and forcibly take it out of it, then you may just give it a whole new breath of life by accident. So that's the difficult thing. That's trying to get the difficult balance, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're right as well. The point you were saying about sort of the feeling of seeing like extreme sectarianism on the streets when you're someone from Glasgow or even Scotland, you're sort of feeling a little bit uncomfortable. You don't want to associate that, and I think we do have a wee bit of a problem of maybe distancing ourselves from the problems that we have in this country a little bit at times. A lot of us like to think Scotland's probably more progressive than it is, and that's probably part of that kind of package of turning away from those issues. Yeah.
It's very, very tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also something that goes beyond Glasgow. I mean, again, one of the areas where we have a food bank is Lark Hall. And I remember having the awkward conversation with them about the possibility of having a blue logo. They were not sure about having a green food bank logo, which is generally our colour. And they were just being honest, and this is something we have to deal with every single day. You're in a part of the country where every lamppost for 1 week has a Union Jack attached to it, where the green traffic lights are bomb-proof. The only other place that's the case is Belfast, where they have a blue Asda sign, where the subway uses black, yellow and white branding rather than green, yellow and white branding. Most of the chemists has had to adjust itself. The only thing green in Lark Hall is the grass. And I think so it's something that transcends just beyond, Glasgow. But I'm absolutely with you, Angela. I think when you ban that, you suppress free speech naturally. And what next? I want to. You want to see the WASPy women being able to to share their message. You want to see people being able to campaign for independence and against independence. I think that's the nature of free speech. It's the nature of democracy. We have to. You're absolutely right. We have to preserve that at all costs, and that means the good and the bad.
There's another thing to say though about the Orange Walk and the Orange March, and it's something that I think that there's almost a little bit of, not snobbery is not the word maybe here, but there is an element of people that really look down on people who associate themselves with the Orange Order. Now this might be people that's actually in it, involved in it, or just the kind of hangers on, the marchers that go to these things and just feel like it's vaguely connected to what they consider the culture to be. But actually a lot of the people in these communities, particularly in the west coast of Scotland, not so much in Glasgow itself, they are really dilapidated communities. They're communities where they've had a lot of economic ruin. They've been forgotten, basically. You know, you go to some of these places and it's just an air of depression and that you can't get rid of until you leave it. I mean, people have said that to me, that they feel like they're being beaten down by something when they're in some of these areas, and there's a lack of social mobility for the people that are living there in great poverty. All of the things that as progressive people in Scotland would say that they are trying to fight, all of those things exist within these communities, and there's an attachment to a culture that, you know, we look at and think that's ridiculous and it's bigoted and it's racist, but we don't look much further than that. We don't try and understand the people that have attached themselves to it and why that might be. And I think actually there's you're looking at communities here that have probably fallen an awful lot in the last few decades from where they were, and rather than maybe just pointing fingers at them all the time and shouting down at them, maybe it might make a difference if you actually go in and speak to them and try and change the situations that they're in. But it's you know, always point the finger and scream racist. But does it fix the problem?
But speaking of areas that are maybe underfunded, let's say, or not necessarily getting the investment that they need, that will bring us on to probably the last story we'll have a chance to talk about this week, which was basically looking at the deal that the DUP managed to secure for themselves. Basically, essentially the Conservative government giving them £1 billion so that they would back them so Theresa May could stay in power. Because that's ultimately what it comes down to. It is ultimately a means for Theresa May to stay in power. And while it is actually great that Northern Ireland is getting more money, because everywhere deserves a little bit more, there's still a sort of this weird shadow over it, because that's what it is. If the DUP weren't necessary to have Theresa May be the Prime Minister, Northern Ireland would not be getting that funding. And in a bid to kind of try and explain some of that away this week, Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Tories in Scotland, said that it was essentially the same as a city deal, which is why Scotland wasn't getting any money from the Barnett formula as a result of that. Something that David Mundell had actually said would happen is now not. And what it's actually left is this really interesting thing that was brought up, that because that's sort of being circumvented through the Barnett formula, around the Barnett formula, there's now this sort of bizarre situation where there's sort of like a 3,000% difference per head per year in the city deal structure, where it's now working out as about £263 per head in Northern Ireland with the money that they're getting, compared to Scotland, where I think it's about £17 per head. It's just like kind of what priority now. So I think it kind of like kills any idea of that that this is just another city deal and a casual thing rather than ultimately what it was. And I think a lot of people are looking at this in the context of as well the fact that another £4 billion is about to get cut out from Scotland's welfare budget from Westminster as well. People are certainly seeing this cutting in funding hitting Scotland that isn't necessarily going to be as impactful on Northern Ireland, ultimately because of the fact that the Tories have found it politically useful to push that money in that direction. I mean, do you think people are going to be looking at it that way, or are going to be more frustrated as a result now that it's becoming even clearer what that money was?
Well, I think, first of all, credit to the DUP for getting such a quality deal. I mean, there's not going to be a pothole unfilled in Northern Ireland for the next 5 years, you can guarantee that. Yeah. Do you know, I mean, Alistair Campbell said it on Question Time a few weeks ago. He said he went into talks with Tony Blair about the Northern Ireland peace process, and he said they are rigorous negotiators. They will get a good deal. And he said, by contrast, he says, you know, my feeling is that when we've seen Theresa May, you know, be put under pressure, she seems to crumble. His words, not mine. So I think they've got a good deal here, and they were always going to get a good deal. And so I think, I think you're right, Stephen. I think any situation that leaves one part of, you know, I mean, essentially we're 4 constituent parts of the United Kingdom here. There is always going to be questions about how much Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland per head of population by contrast to England. And it was, again, it was one of these topics that came up in 2014 quite consistently in the run-up to the referendum. So I think people will be looking at it that way. I think people will be saying, come on, let's, if we're talking about equality here, if we are talking about a progressive society, then you have to find a way in which that stems down to absolutely every strata of society. I've got to be honest on this whole thing. I think that the Conservatives are on a very, very sugary peg. I'd be surprised if... I think the fact that the DUP have not chosen to go into coalition and again wedded themselves to this confidence in supply arrangement gives them the right of veto at any point. So it's going to be a very interesting couple of years. Angela, you're going to have loads of stuff to write about over the next couple of years. I mean, if the last you thought the last 2 years were busy, you know, the storm is yet to hit.
Forgotten what sleep is. But yeah, I agree in the sense that who can blame the DUP? They went in there and they've got a good deal for the people in Northern Ireland that are struggling like everyone else is. I mean, that's what anyone would want their devolved administration to do, go and fight for the best deal that you can get. But for me, what it's saying is I worried a little bit that it might turn into some sort of a regional fight. It might suit some politicians for that to be the case rather than focus on the fact that Theresa May suddenly found £1 billion out of nowhere to give to the DUP. In terms of somehow Northern Ireland being more selfish or greedy than everywhere else, that they're getting something that we're not getting. Why did they get it? And that would be a mistake to go down that road, because let's face it, any devolved administration would take more money for that area if it was on offer. Of course they would. So, but it's the question of, you're looking at things like Grenfell, where the response to that was atrocious in that first few instances, and I think that the people that were affected by it, they were getting shunted into hotels and they were given a pittance to get by on. Things like sorting out who was paying rent to who and what was all of these things. It took ages for any sort of movement on these like much smaller financial issues, and yet there's £1 billion out of nowhere. Talk about the magic money tree. And there's so many issues that you could say that about. It's not just Grenfell. There's so many things going on in the country at any given time that could do with a cash injection. And we're constantly told that the money's not there, austerity, yada, yada, yada. And there, Theresa May found it. When the Tories want to hold on to power, it's amazing what you can find down the back of the couch. So that, to me, is what people should be focusing on. It's the unfairness of that, the fact that money can be found when it's beneficial to those in power, but not when the people who are most needy need it. But it might become irrelevant because we don't know how long this is going to last. It could collapse at any time.
And hasn't it been fascinating as well to watch the narrowing of the polls? I mean, even to see Labour in front now when literally they were falling off a cliff edge, 2 months ago. I mean, it's just, politics has just gone bananas. And to see the ascendancy of the Labour Party at the moment, speaking to a friend who was saying if they can seize the initiative on this at this point, it could be a very interesting few years.
Oh, I mean, we're already seeing movement on things like the pay cap and everything else. So Corbyn at least is going to be in a position to start to pull things away from the right, at least a bit. If you think, 4 or 5 months ago, every lefty in the country was terrified at the fact that the country was taking such and even further lurch to the right. Now we're suddenly looking at actually there's some room to make some gains on that.
Or even discussions about tuition fees suddenly popping up.
Exactly.
Maybe we'll scrap them. Youth, come on back. Because they see that support slipping away.
But I mean, you're absolutely right. It's some of these issues have just resurfaced. A very good friend of mine, who is a Labour Party member, was running a campaign for one of the MPs in Wales. Said, my local MP, who has generally been opposed to Corbyn, is now eating humble pie. He was in this one of these marginal seats, and ultimately had to say, my majority has increased rapidly because of the Corbyn effect. So I think it's really interesting to see how things are just shifting in the political world at the moment, and it's very interesting. It's a fascinating time.
Absolutely. But that just brings us to the end of the show, because we've now been here for 45 minutes.
Was there any comments about the haircut?
I'm really sorry, but
you got mines.
There's none.
I'll give you a comment.
Actually, hang on a second. We do need to settle one thing though, because everyone's having a conversation about why you're wearing sunglasses indoors.
Sorry. Yes. Well, okay, let me explain. The reason is I do actually have eyes. I haven't taken drugs. It's actually because my other my wee girl sat on my other pair of glasses recently. So the only prescription lenses I have are sunglasses. And I didn't want to do the Jack Duckworth thing and come in with a sellotape, so that's the reason I've got these on. But I do have eyes.
That was the
mystery
wrong
solved.
answer. You should just have said, because I'm that cool.
Yeah.
I'm just
Oh,
that
thank you so much. Well, it's not that.
So there
but,
it was. No questions about your hair, but a lot of conversation about why you're wearing
That's
sunglasses.
Thank you, folks.
I don't know why I bother. but
Well, there you go.
It's lovely.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you
great.
very much.
Yep, so that does
Yep.
bring us to the end of the show. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. And before to wrap up, we'd just like to say also congratulations to Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Tory MP, who recently had another child.
A sixth child.
And a sixth child. And of course, in true keeping with the spirit of the Conservative recently, to try and show that they are in fact in touch with people and definitely not a bit antiquated, the child's full name is Sixtus Dominic Boniface Christopher Rees-Mogg. Which, you know, is just like anybody you'd bump into in the street.
Yeah.
His wife didn't allow him Prognatheus, which was the other option, so yeah.
I mean, you take
That's
what
like
you can get.
something out of Alien.
I just like how all of his kids have like these really long names, except for his daughter, is just Mary. It's like, at some point in the future, she's going to be like, Dad, why have all the sons? And then, okay, well, that's a question for another time that Jacob will have to answer. But yeah, that does bring us to the end of the show. So thank you for tuning in, thank you for commenting, thank you for sharing. We will be back again next week at 3 p.m. with myself and Angela and another special guest. So thanks both for coming in and for joining us today. And we'll see you all again next week. And as always, if you want to help support our journalism, you can subscribe to The National for as little as £1.74 a week. Just go to the website and go up to the subscribe button at the top of the page, and you can help us do that. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all again another time.